Insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. Now, this was one hell of an episode. Each episode more traumatizing than the next, and if you don't want to continue watching, I 100% understand. Before the flashback, Ruben is telling people he is Niall's brother at the wedding, basically acting like, we're so close. Niall tries to stand up to him, but quickly backs down for very good reason. My only question was, why on earth would he agree to go to the barn alone with this man? Niall clearly felt like he owed him a conversation at the very least, and by the end of the episode we realize what this conflict is about and why Niall is very hesitant to stand up to Ruben. We catch up with Niall and Ruben slipping back into the same toxic dynamic, one that sadly leads towards literally the same destructive outcome. Everything comes full circle. Niall is more closed off than when we last saw him, especially as he prepares to have a child with his partner, Ava. He has not only stopped sleeping with men, but now insists it was just a phase he sought treatment for. In reality, he was scammed into taking a conversion style course, and the person running the course, I guess, robbed him of $30,000. He's so desperate for a solution to what he believes is the problem that has defined his entire life. However, he is lost in almost every aspect of his life. What makes it worse is his belief that he's managing to hide it all so well. Like, everybody knows. Like, everybody takes time in this episode to say, hey, you look like The Walking Dead. Like, you don't look good. This episode was really important, and it kind of confirms what we already knew, that their relationship is rooted in toxicity and violence. Every time Niall speaks to Ruben, he immediately falls into this defensive, almost trembling posture, bracing himself to say whatever Ruben wants to hear. Niall honestly looks like he's always just getting ready to get his ass beat. You can see how a lot of their interactions lack consent. Even if Niall tries to defend himself, Ruben will scream and shout at him until Niall does exactly what he tells him to do. Now, as Niall predicted, Ruben ultimately sabotaged his own success. Ruben hasn't changed at all. That's the thing. Like, every episode we meet a new version of Niall. Like, Niall is never the same in each of these episodes, but Ruben always is. But I have to say, Ruben's come up has been very impressive. It felt temporary because underneath it all, he's still a raging bull, incapable of controlling his anger and destructive impulses. But still, like, he was doing quite well. Since we last saw Niall, Ruben has been bailing him out of trouble and essentially funding his lifestyle. In addition, the woman that Niall is with is very well off. So he managed to get a loan of $30,000 from both of them, neither of whom he's paid off. Niall is still pursuing his dreams of being a writer, but at the moment his only inspiration is Ruben. When the episode begins and we find out Niall's partner Ava is pregnant, he is not excited. He doesn't sleep with her often, but that's not really important. It takes one time. We are then reunited with Ruben and Mona, whose entire relationship is gross and performative. And this is pretty much as unhealthy as we anticipated. I mean, the first time we saw them, this didn't feel right. And they have this intense sexual connection, but beyond that, they really have nothing else in common. Ruben has always relied on his sexuality as a way of overcompensating for his masculinity. When he was staying with Niall in college, he was behaving in the same way, like being overperformative and doing gross acts of PDA. During the social interaction, as well as in other moments throughout the episode, we see that Niall is still as emotionally sensitive as before. He takes everything personally and struggles to let comments slide, interpreting everything as a lack of respect. He's not comfortable in his own identity. He really cares what other people think. Like, he's not able to really hold his own. And he really resents the fact that everyone around him can see right through him. He's still trying his best to maintain a facade, but it's so paper thin, and by the end of the episode, it collapses entirely, and he breaks down completely. Niall's relationship with Ruben begins to go downhill again when Ruben asks Niall for the money he loaned him. Now, I was impressed that Ruben's life actually came from a legitimate source of income, like he really was working. Even though he was fired, he was making an honest living. Now, why he got fired? His temper got him fired. And that's the thing, he just lacks self-control. Like, he repeats the same cycles, and there's really nothing in his behavior to suggest that he's going to change it. Niall's reaction to Ruben's request was so unreasonable. Now, at the same time, I think some part of Niall feels like Ruben owes him for all the torture he put him through. He vents to his mother that Ruben is trying to sabotage him, even though his book is nowhere near completion and he's unemployed. He also tells her that the narrative they agreed on is that they screwed each other over, which is so far from the truth. Ruben has no self-control, and this narrative that Niall has agreed to has done immense damage to his perception of the world. He constantly compromises his own well-being and stability to appease a man who lives in his own separate universe. He finds himself going down the same rabbit holes as Ruben, getting increasingly lost and invested in a version of reality that is so far removed from any truth. To find common ground, Niall agrees to take Ruben out and talk him into some type of loan repayment. Or talk him out of it, really. Now, the scene was hilarious because there's nothing calm about that man. Like, watching him punch, like, in this little arcade, or this, it was so... you could tell Niall was like, this was a bad idea. Ruben then does what he does best, which is clown Niall and saying, well, listen, man, your dreams have given up on you and you need to give me this money because even if you publish this damn book, you're not making, I need my 30K back. He never apologizes to Niall for any of his offhand comments or aggressive behaviors. And Niall always says things like, oh, no need to apologize, but Ruben really does not care. Although they both agree they've hurt each other, Ruben clearly believes Niall is more to blame, and you can see that in the way that he treats him. This conversation is the first look we get into how fragile his relationship with Mona is. He is furious that she wants to teach dance classes and becomes convinced it is because of a man named Benji. He frames it as someone taking something that belongs to him, in this case his wife. To make ends meet, he agrees to reduce the loan payment if Niall agrees to be his maid, and in effect keep an eye on his wife. Watching Niall clean this man's house was so distressing, like nothing was worth that humiliation. And I don't think Niall ever processed what Ruben and Mona did to him. If you recall, he felt completely deflated when he discovered the whole situation was a setup. Part of him at least wanted to believe that Mona wanted him, but none of that was true. And watching his interactions with Mona this episode, it felt like he was at first trying to get into her good graces, and then he was actively trying to seduce her. When he mentions what she looked like dancing, how free she looked, that changes her mind. And she decides, you know what, I'm actually going to do the dance classes, even though Ruben had pretty much convinced her not to. Now, the gap between what Ruben wants Niall to do and what Niall is actually doing grows as the episode goes on. And I think Niall initially made the comment as something nice to say, and he tries to defend himself with Ruben. He says, what is the big deal? Like, let the girl dance. And Ruben's reaction is so explosive. Niall does what he does in his presence. He backs down. He stops defending himself and he regresses. And the way that Ruben treats Niall and Mona follows a pattern often associated with controlling or abusive behavior. He describes her as having sat all day waiting for him, framing her almost like an obedient pet rather than a partner. And when it comes to Ruben, there are no equals. There's only two types of people in his world: those he perceives as threats, like Benji, that must be neutralized, and those he believes he can control and punish. In this case, Mona and Niall. He then orders Niall to follow Mona and report back to him. Now, Niall's reaction when he sees Benji was a bit much. I mean, he starts to internalize Ruben's point of view. Like, he's condemned Benji even before he's gotten to know him. He never tries to talk to him. He just kind of sees their interaction and immediately is pissed off. That night, he has a conversation with Mona that completely shifts his outlook and begins to fracture what little remains of the facade he's been maintaining. Because prior to this conversation, he was not at all excited about the pregnancy. The way he was behaving, he's like another burden. Like, he is not ready to be a father financially, emotionally. His partner feels like a roommate, someone he gets along with, but he's so indifferent towards her, like she's convenient for him. And his whole life after reuniting with Ruben has been an attempt to mirror him. He secured a steady girlfriend. He has a stable image, or what he thinks is a stable image. And he's trying to get by. Like, if you don't look too closely at Niall, he does seem very put together. When he learns that Ruben is infertile, he totally loses his mind. He gets this instant high, as if a man's fertility should determine his manhood. Now, this was a different time. This was definitely a stigma for a man, and it would have, like, there would be a massive chip on Ruben's shoulders. According to Mona, Ruben has lost his mind to the whole thing. As we know, Ruben was abused as a child, and it seems like he desperately wanted the opportunity to break the family cycle. From this point on, that's all Niall can think about. He starts to brainwash himself into thinking he wants a child. This man has no paternal instincts. He sits through those parenting classes like he has a gun to his head. Like, he's really not trying to live this life. The only benefits to having a baby for Niall would be because Ruben can't have one, and he knows that it would devastate him. So he goes over to his mom, talking a big game, and she's like, hey, so how's heterosexuality treating you? Have you found your straight side? And then she calls him out. She said, well, you found your straight side as soon as Ruben came back. How odd. Now, Niall can barely look his mother in the eye when she asks him if he's sure he wants a child. He's as certain as Ruben is innocent. The only benefits of having a child, again, maybe it would help reinforce this image he's trying to project as a very normal straight man, but it also deepens the trap that he's already in. Instead of offering stability or fulfillment, it would lock him into a version of a life that clearly is not making him happy. While coming home with Ava from one of these parenting classes, Ruben is waiting outside for Niall, and he's like, okay, what happened with Benji? Now, Niall does his best to calm the situation down, but he tells him about the hug, and Ruben becomes obsessed, being like, show me the hug. Like, he's really on him about this hug. And Niall clearly wants out of this disaster, but again, Ruben just pushes back. He says, you owe me money. You don't even have a life. Like, anytime Niall fights back, Ruben just insults his entire existence. And during their conversations, I kept thinking about all the moments we don't see when Niall goes along with Ruben into situations. Like, what happens when you say no to Ruben? Well, he screams at you until you say yes. Now, Ruben basically tells Niall, like, we're done when I say we're done. And so poor Niall, in an attempt to restore his ego, tells Ruben that Ava is pregnant. And Ruben's reaction is immediate and violent. He begins to emasculate and humiliate him, escalating the confrontation without any hesitation. And this is pretty much their dynamic. Like, this is what their relationship is like. And so after this interaction, Niall continues doing Ruben's bidding, intensifying his relationship with Mona, except this time, it takes on he started to kind of seduce her. Now, as far as Mona's concerned, Niall is the good cop to Ruben's bad cop. She sets him up in his office, wearing his robe. And for a moment, Niall actually steps into what it might feel like to live as Ruben. I thought the passage he read her was intentional, again meant to seduce her, capture her attention. And I think for Niall, hearing the news of Ruben's infertility shifts something in his perception. Suddenly, Ruben's life feels more accessible, less untouchable than it once did. It raises the unsettling possibility that he may not be as much of a man as he believed him to be. It also unsettles the hierarchy Niall has internalized between the two of them. It brings Ruben down to his level. One thing the show makes clear is how much smaller Niall feels in Ruben's presence. And Ruben's infertility seems to do more than shock Niall. It destabilizes his entire perception of him. When Niall comes home, he finds Ruben with Ava. It's clear that the news of Ava's pregnancy has triggered Ruben, and he responds by humiliating Niall in front of her. On the surface, Ruben frames it as, hey, once you get this baby, you're not going to give me my $30,000 back. But that's actually not what the situation is about. Like, it did feel like a tit for tat. Now, Niall, in an attempt to kind of regain or restore his ego, hints that he knows about Ruben's infertility, and Ruben immediately busts out of that house saying he's going to kill Mona. And I knew he was going to kill someone this episode, I just didn't know who. And watching him throw her things out and scream at her, again, we don't see what their lives are like on a daily basis, but this is pretty much their dynamic. Like, this is a very unhealthy relationship, and an abusive one at that. After Ruben storms off, and I actually thought he was going to go over to Benji's. I didn't know where Ruben went, so I kept waiting for something. We knew something bad was going to happen. And so Niall and Mona are left in Ruben's house to pick up the pieces. Immediately, Niall steps in, being like, listen, you got to leave this man. And she describes him as a drug she can't get off of. And I think for both Mona and Niall, there's something about Ruben they feel attached to. Now, while they're talking, Mona kisses him, and it completely throws him off guard. Like, he immediately backs up, like his reaction, and then he doesn't really know what to do with himself, so he initiates sex. And this scene, especially compared to the first episode, marks a clear shift in their dynamic. Niall is no longer looking at her. She's not on top of him. He's completely emotionally detached and distant from her. Like, this is not love. He's on top of her this time, which reinforces the power imbalance. What makes this scene so unsettling is the absence of genuine intimacy. And what emerges is a doom loop. Like, that's what these characters are stuck in. They do the same thing over and over again, where power, dependence, and desire are tangled in a way where neither one of them is able to break out of it. And this encounter with Mona marks the beginning of the end for Niall's new persona. So this version of Niall that we have met this episode is now dead. Niall goes home in shambles, and he explains to Ava how his whole life is a mess. He confesses how he lost the $30,000, and poor Niall has been humiliated and robbed more times than he can even remember. And the thing is, everyone tries to reassure him that it's not a big deal. Like, he can live however he wants to live. But he's so deep in a rabbit hole, and there's such a discrepancy between who he is and who he wants to be, and he's kind of like demonized himself. He's in a hell partly of his own making, and things only continue to get worse when he sees Mona again. And this whole conversation with Mona was so uncomfortable, because at first he kind of brushes it off like, hey, it was a moment of madness, let's just kind of move on. Then the moment he picks up on her indifference, that fragile sense of control he was holding on to starts to collapse. The confidence he entered with quickly evaporates. He then starts talking about himself in the third person, saying, well, she slept with his brother, as if he had no control over the matter. He then comes to the cruel realization that Ruben's suspicions about Benji were correct. However, his outrage was extremely performative, and it just felt like he was trying to construct a narrative that protected his own image. He tries to frame Mona as the mastermind or aggressor, but it takes two to tango. And I think what stood out to me was how much effort he was putting into justifying his actions, and it just felt like damage control. And he needs a story so he can regain his sense of authority in the moment. But this is destroyed when Mona pretty much reads him for filth. She said, listen, the reason you're mad is because you thought you were special. You're right, this does mean nothing, and we're moving on. After this conversation with Mona, his behavior unravels. He drops the idea of wanting a child, lashes out at Ava. He can't even pretend to sit through these classes. I thought when she told him, I'm paying for your life, whew, that hurt. Because we know how sensitive he is. Like, he's already feeling emasculated, and so he's gone. And so he goes back to Ruben. He sends him an erratic voice note about Benji, being like, I got something to tell you. And the way that he's panicking, I mean, he literally goes on this desperate search for him as if he's in a race against time. And he really is trying to rewrite himself as loyal and misunderstood rather than someone who's lost self-control. Now, to our shock, Ruben is jobless and homeless, and he's staying with a friend, a man, which I thought was really telling because, again, it's kind of hinted that Ruben is also struggling with his sexuality, so I'm not sure why he's living with a man, what's going on there. But the way Ruben was running away from him, like, this is a side note, but the way they dress Ruben, his clothes are too tight, his wife beaters, like, he just always looks like such a hot mess. Now we find out that Ruben was fired for reasons expected. He was violent. Since then, he's been maxing out credit cards and asking for loans back. And Ruben is such a great case study in how help can come with mixed motives. Some people offer support in ways that are conditional, controlling, or self-serving in order to have leverage over you, and it's not really rooted in genuine care. And I think that's why discernment is key. Noticing whether someone's support expands your autonomy or gradually narrows it. And I think the boundary between support and control is completely blurred in this relationship. Ruben likes having people to depend on him. It reinforces his sense of masculinity and importance. His actions appear selfless on the surface, but there's usually a clear sense of personal attachment and emotional investment beneath them. During the conversation, he mentions how prison makes it difficult to find a job, implying that Niall is to blame for his current situation. He also says he trusts Niall more than anyone, which adds a layer of complexity and contradiction. And when Niall drops Ruben back off, he starts crying. Like, he really takes this to heart. The revelation breaks down whatever is left of Niall at this point. His grasp on events begin to unravel, and he struggles to distinguish between what is real and what he's convinced himself to be real. There's a growing instability in his perception. He's trying to ground himself, but everything is out of control. He then tries to resume life as normal, but there's really no point in maintaining a facade without Ruben there to reflect it back to him. And just like he was warned by his mother in his darkest hours, he resumes his same destructive patterns, seeing a male escort. And I don't think he's been with a man for a long time, so you can just tell he kind of goes there in shame, like with his head low, like this is really rock bottom. He then returns to Ava and spends the night crying on her couch, and she's pretty much fed up with him for good reason. While he's crying on the couch, Ruben comes in and starts banging on the door. He says, hey, so I listened to that voice note you sent. Do you mind explaining? And the way they're sitting at that table, like, Niall looks like petrified. Like, he looks like the way he's just sitting there shrinking in his presence. Ruben basically goes on to lay the evidence. He says, I found my dressing gown on the table. It smells like another man. And before Ruben could place the scent, Niall throws Benji under the bus, saying he didn't know the extent of it. And that's all Ruben needed to go off. And just like that, we're right back to where we started. Ruben annihilates the man without hesitation, driven by something far beyond anger. Niall is frozen in place. He can't intervene. And this scene, I was shocked. Like, I was sitting there shocked. I mean, there's really, for all the Ruben truthers out there, he's just nuts. I mean, he's why we have prisons. And then there's the final moment. Ruben looks at Niall, and that look carries everything he hasn't said. Warning, accusation, something unreadable and heavy. And then we flash forward to the present, and we see that Ruben is locking them in that barn. And so you know that only one of them can make it out alive, or maybe none of them. So we'll find out in the next episode. So if you're kind of done with the show, I understand. Like, it's very unforgiving. The humor is dark and virtually non-existent, but this is just savage. So you guys let me know what you think, and until next time.